Parataxe Digital.
I welcome you back to our symposium, Parataxe number 16, Antipodes. It's called Down Under in Berlin, and it's about Australian, New Zealand, Tasmanian, other islands of the down underworld. Authors living in Berlin. There are some, more than I expected, and with more interesting topics than I expected. There was no novel about kangaroos so far. There was no koala poetry and so on. And to tell the truth, I'm not really surprised, but I'm happy to get to know so many interesting authors and experts and activists. Hello. And you are Areez. Now I understand.
I was having a cigarette.
I already talked to him, but I didn't know that he is Areez. Happy to have you here. Hello. My name is Martin Jankowski, the association who organizes these series of symposiums exploring the international literary scenes of Berlin. This time it's the language Australian and Aotearoan. We have no fixed venue. We are wandering around, but from time to time we stop here at the Maschinenhaus and make bigger projects like this symposium today. And I'm very honored to announce now the next panel with the beautiful title, What Now? Durchgangsstation Berlin in globalen Zeiten. And the good message is, it's in English. You don't have to listen too carefully to ugly German words. We had that before, but now the panel is with Sanja, Grozdanić, Areez, Katki, and Ellena Savage again, but this time not as the moderator. Now you have to answer all the serious questions. Moderation this time takes over Shannon Redstall. I'm looking forward to it. Welcome to the panel.
Thank you, Martin. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the third panel of the day, Berlin as a transit station in global times. As Martin said, I'm Shannon Redstall, and I come from New Zealand. I'm a recent arrival, actually. We just got here in December, so I'm very intrigued to hear what you have to say, because all of the things that we're going to be discussing are things that I have been spending a lot of time thinking about before I was even invited to speak here. It's a great topic. So I actually come to Parataxe with a journalism background rather than a writing one. I spent 10 years working for various newsrooms around New Zealand, covering everything from natural disasters to terrorism to politics, but recently my favourite topic has been human interest and injustice. At the moment I'm working at Deutsche Welle, which is Germany's state international broadcaster, and so my work there is largely based on global issues and geopolitics, which is also brings quite an interesting lens. My connection to Germany is that I came here 12 or 13 years ago as an exchange student and learnt German, which is also part of the reason why we came back. So in the scheme of what we're talking about now, I feel reasonably well integrated. My German is quite good and could pass as German at some points, so that's kind of my lens. I feel like it might be, we're all going to be exploring this, so good for you guys to know where I'm coming from. And yeah, I've spent the past few months asking myself, what does it mean to live in this city? Like, is this a pit stop for me? Is this going to be a longer stay? I don't know yet. How has my experience been shaped by the fact that I speak German, or that my husband's last name is Hermann Watt and he can pass as German just on paper? Changes things. So much to discuss, so I would love to introduce the three of you and then also invite you to speak briefly about what you're working on at the moment. I'd love to hear kind of, I guess, where your frame of mind is at creatively, what part of the process you're in, and also what type of work you're working on, because the three of these guys are not strictly writers, I shall say. I will start with Areez, who is a writer and artist, and you specialise in beautiful embroidered works. Areez lives between Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland, in New Zealand, and in Mumbai, India, but you're currently in Berlin as part of an artist residency, which is amazing, thanks to Creative New Zealand and Künstlerhaus Betanien. And Areez, what are you working on in your residency at the moment?
Well, kia ora. The premise of the residency, based on what I proposed for the project, was kind of ambitious, and it's probably not going to happen by the end of this year, but it was a novel. And an exhibition in 3 parts that explored the format of an autofictive, biomythographic novel format.
And Areez, okay, there's lots of non-native English speakers.
Yeah.
So what do those words mean?
Which words in particular?
Autofictive and biomythographical.
I actually know some of the German terms. So thinking of it as a Künstlerroman, somewhere between a Bildungsroman and a Künstlerroman, if that lands with the German ear, is what I worked on during my master's thesis at the International Institute of Modern Letters, which is a creative writing program in Poneke, Wellington. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you. Next we have Ellena, who you might recognise as the moderator from the previous panel. Ellena is an author from Melbourne, Australia, and she spent a brief jaunt in Berlin before settling down in Athens, which is really interesting. She still makes regular trips back here because of her networks of friends and connections, and because it's a nice place and stimulating place to be in. Ellena is the author of Blueberries, a collection of essays about her life experiences, the most celebrated of which is called Yellow City. And she's also had numerous essays, stories, and poems published in literary journals internationally. And Ellena, what are you working on at the moment?
I just finished and sold my first novel.
Oh, congratulations.
It's called The Ruiners, and it's sort of, if I had to distill it, it's about inheritance and waste. It's an intertext of great expectations. And now I'm working on a new novel. I guess my background was as an essayist, and now I really just want to write novels for the rest of my life. They're really fun. My new novel that I've just started working on is about a cum thief, if anyone knows what that is. It's about a woman who... it's actually about violence. I kind of find myself quite obsessed with violence at the moment, I guess because we're all saturated by a very extreme, brutal violence in everyday life. And this character has a desire to kind of bring new life into this kind of extremely violent, necrophilic world. And so I'm kind of interested in how we incorporate, navigate, internalize violence and the kind of feral desires that we have to kind of find our way out of it. So that's what I'm working on at the moment. Yeah.
Okay, and last but not least, we have Sanja, who is a writer of art criticism and fiction, as well as, would you say, performance artist? You're an actor. Hard to categorise, I won't try. But to help with orientation, she was born in Bosnia but grew up in Australia and now lives in Berlin, but also spends quite a lot of time in New York. And Sanja, you are working on a film adaptation at the moment. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. I certainly wouldn't describe myself as an actor, so we'll begin there. I am a writer and an artist. At the moment, I'm finishing work on 2 kind of larger film projects, which were born out of, or the first, Permanent Trespass, is born out of a theatre performance that I have been working on for some 3 years with my collaborator, Bassem Assad, who is also a writer. So the piece began very much as a text, as a script, a very kind of, I guess, unusual script in that It follows two quote-unquote professional mourners whose names are not revealed and whose identities are largely ambiguous, as they go through these kind of series of recollections and are interrupted by a spectral third voice, which is something like the voice of accepted kind of history. And then it moves on to this this eulogy that they've been commissioned to perform for the quote-unquote American century. So it's asking whether that time period has ended, whether it is ongoing. We, myself and my collaborator, have just finished kind of filming and are working on editing this piece into a film. And I have a few other film projects, but I won't go too far into that. I also write fiction, occasional art criticism. At the moment, I'm actually writing about a really brilliant artist from New Zealand who is kind of relatively obscure, despite the fact that she represented New Zealand at the Venice Biennale some 15 years ago, but she's really successfully self-marginalized herself by not kind of playing into some of the necessary art world games. So that's been interesting. I also, I work as an editor from time to time. I am kind of, I guess, still quote-unquote based in Berlin, but I have also been spending a lot of time in New York. So I've just arrived back some 2-3 weeks ago, and that's an introduction.
Thank you. I'm excited to hold this discussion with 3 such interesting people. So our panel is Berlin as a transit station in global times, and I wanted to start with, I guess, what does the city mean to each of you? Is it a transit station for you? Is it home? Is it still yet to be decided? I'll start with you, Areez.
I mean, in my case, it's almost a given that it will be a transit station because if you're familiar with the kind of format of artist residencies, it is an island of time when you arrive and you're kind of getting to know the space, its rhythms, and its qualities. And thankfully, mine is a year, so I do get that sort of generous span of time to be able to engage with the place. I've done shorter ones where it was 3 months, 6 months, and then you're barely, warming up, and then you have to leave, which is kind of heartbreaking. So far I'm exactly halfway through my residency, halfway through my time in Berlin, and I've got, 5 and a bit more months to go. It is definitely a transit station for me. I don't know if I will stick around, but I'll definitely keep coming back. I have projects around this region that will bring me back here, exhibiting work and stuff. Yeah.
Did you seek out Berlin when you were applying for the residency, or was it more the length of time that attracted you to it? Or did you get placed here? How did it work?
So there was a kind of open call for artists who wanted to situate themselves in Berlin and work with this institution. And I guess I threw my name in the ring with my proposal, and there were a series of conversations. And I knew what the residency entailed. It meant a year and these resources that get offered to you at this period of time. And
Mm-hmm. So did you have some preconceived ideas about the city, and have those ideas been stood up, or has your mind been changed?
So I had...
This is a friendly space.
I had lived in Berlin before. I should have mentioned that. It wasn't a very long period of time, but in 2022 I was assisting the artist who represented Aotearoa at the Venice Biennale back then. And she was doing an exhibition at the Alte National Gallery here. So I did get to know the place back in 22, which was fresh out of COVID. And it was summer, it was electric, it was great. certain opinions were formed about this place and its qualities.
Do you?
I'm being very cryptic.
Yeah, do you want to expand on that?
I guess it's kind of really, it's not something that we have in Aotearoa, you know. We don't have places that engage in, I guess, history and also histories of queerness in the same kind of, on the same kind of scale. I mean, I guess I really got into the clubbing scene and you know, the queer dark rooms and gay clubs in a way that we just don't have. And I mean, Tamaki Makoto has a little bit, but so it just it kind of brought forth this idea of this very hedonistic space and the kind of experiences that can be had here felt like. I was at that time an interloper, and now I'm slightly, more advanced or whatnot, and I understand. But yeah, it was a really fun summer, and then I guess things got more complex as you spend more time in a place. Yeah.
Ellena, you also spent quite a brief time here in the scheme of things when you were living here.
Yeah.
What did it come to mean to you?
I lived here for one winter, the longest winter of my life.
Oof.
In 2016, which is so long ago. And I came here, I was doing my PhD, I had a scholarship. In Australia, my scholarship kind of just covered my rent. And I was kind of sick of working minimum wage jobs while studying full-time and trying to be a writer. And my younger brother had lived here, and basically, I mean, this is a very acquisitive and kind of ethically dubious kind of decision to make, but the rents were cheap. I didn't want to work minimum wage jobs anymore, and I had this year on my scholarship left, and so I wanted to spend it writing and reading and not serving falafels. And so that's what I did. And I came here and I met my husband, and I read a million books in bed, and I didn't do very much writing. And I just kind of, I found that I could not bear winters this long, and I ended up moving to Athens. But I also kind of realized that the ethics of moving somewhere just because it's cheap is not enough, right? You have to be able to envision a future, build a future, and contribute to the place that you're living in. And I couldn't actually see myself doing that here, whereas I can see myself doing that in Athens, and I'm trying to build things there. And so I have a kind of, maybe a deeper relationship with the city that I live in. But there's something really brilliant about this place. Even as, a random Australian writer, there's a large network of Antipodean writers here, Anglophone writers. I think it's a really, really interesting space for, expat Anglophone writers. I think they're doing really interesting stuff here. I think it was Madeline Watts said something like, it's like Paris in the 20s, There's all these people, and they're all doing stuff. And the writing does change when you're kind of removed from your cultural context. I think that the writing becomes more interesting, or it becomes different and weirder. So that interests me. And so I come back most years for a month or two, and I spend time with it's one of the kind of nodes in my broader network. And I like spending time here, but yeah, I don't want to live here.
Do you like it more in the summer?
Yeah.
Of course.
Of course.
Do you think you could have had a materially different experience with the city if you had have come during different months?
This is what people tried to convince me of.
I'm not trying to convince you. I'm just
if
curious.
if you lived here in summer, you would have stayed. And I'm like, yeah, but it's only summer for 6 weeks. So.
I'm yet to experience it, so
Same.
No comment. We'll have a good time. Okay, and Sanja, what about you? You are fluctuating between here and there, but you have been here for the longest of the four of us. Mm-hmm. What does the city mean to you? How has that evolved over time?
I guess I moved here 5-ish years ago from London, And I was certainly drawn to Berlin mostly for the fact that it has an accessible visa for people who work, as it's popularly known as the artist visa, but it's not, it's a freelance visa. And that is, the accessibility of Berlin was to a degree always a fantasy, but it's certainly fading. But in any case, the visa was the initial reason that I came here, which was in 2020. And then, time happened and I stayed on. That being said, I was just reading, the idea of Berlin or any city as a transit place, I'm not opposed to it at all. I think that, it's the material conditions of cities that make it impossible to stay within them most of the time. And in particular, while, we should question why certain types of visas are kind of politically desirable and are made accessible for a certain class, of course, and then, how and why that changes is certainly something to think about. But I was also just reading an interview with the late Croatian author Dubravka Ugrešić. Actually, certainly she would not like being called Croatian author, former Yugoslav author and just author. And she said something like, why is exile seen as the kind of like deviance? Why is rootedness the norm? And she said something to the degree of people are much easier to kind of manipulate when they're rooted. I'm, in an ideal country, free movement would be more encouraged. And, often as artists or as writers, the ways in which we can make our lives in any way viable is through things like artist residencies, through certain nodes like that, which does mean that, there's a great many difficulties that come from that. There's a great many kind of like, that's also a form of precarity. It does mean that you also move around a lot. And as for me, Berlin, to a degree, I would say it is, of course, I don't identify with the idea of home. So I have many friends and people that I love here. And at the same time, it's also a really difficult city to live in for other reasons. I don't know if it's I don't know if I've answered that now. I don't know if it's a transit place, but I don't think I would ever, I think that's kind of the constant of my life in any case.
Yeah, so this concept of home I find really interesting. You don't identify with that. What does make home for you, and how does that change who you are as an artist? Is the work your home? Is a physical space your home? Are people home?
I don't think it's that I don't identify with the idea of home. I guess it's just more that, structurally at the time that we live in any case, it's hard to kind of, it is harder to kind of create these homes in a lot of the cities that some of us would like to live in or to, would have once historically moved to. But certainly friends, networks, political, kind of like the political ideals that are important for me. Berlin certainly has that. I was just thinking recently about the fight against, or the fight for some sort of like rental stabilities, the Deutsche Wohnen fight that was, a really big part of everyone's life like 3-4 years ago. Berlin has a great many kind of, has a rootedness in certain radical politics, but then of course at the same time we see that completely in flux at the moment as well.
So you've just named like a few of the things that have attracted you here and reasons why you like the city, but you said that you weren't interested in or didn't agree with the need for like integration here. What is it that like, to me, I think integration kind of means, and we were talking about this backstage, like that sense of like contributing to where you're coming from and like being a part of maybe some of these political movements, or, you know, doing something to ground yourself in that space. How do you balance those two things, and what is it that makes you not want to deepen your relationship with Berlin and be more integrated?
I think integration is a really tricky word. It also implies assimilation, which is something that I'm not really interested in at all. But certainly I have, you know, kind of like really deep ties to Berlin and to some of the political horizons that myself and many kind of friends and collaborators are working toward. Yeah, I don't know if that...
I think, like, as Martin said earlier, Australians are not very patriotic, and I suspect it's largely because, I mean, demographically, 50% of us have at least one parent born overseas. So we have a kind of, like, if we are not migrants ourselves, our parents are or our grandparents are, and so there's an idea of, like, your life is not a straight line in one place. Your life is ruptured, that your family history is ruptured. You might not even know where your grandparents come from, really. And that sense of rupture, I think, makes leaving possible. It makes the idea of rootedness seem a bit suspicious as well, a bit nationalistic, a bit... if you're a kind of white Australian and you believe in your rootedness in Australia, that's a very sinister position to occupy, actually. It's rooted in genocide, you know, and so I think it's healthy to be very suspicious of rootedness.
Yeah.
Or the single root, right? I think there are other kind of ways of appreciating where we're from without having to...
Definitely. I mean, when my family moved to Australia, which, you know, move is also a difficult word there, but my parents were given, they were on a humanitarian visa from then Yugoslavia, from Bosnia, and they were given the option of, you know, Perth, Adelaide or Canberra. And my mum looked at a map, and Adelaide kind of sat. The Eyre Peninsula kind of looks like Italy if you squint, and Adelaide kind of is where Yugoslavia would have been if you squint. Ultimately, I think she did make the right decision. Adelaide probably was the best of the three. Sorry. But, you know, even that kind of, when you think of all these things, even all of those little stories, I mean, I was sitting with my dad recently, and I had never thought to ask what the specific is. Of course, we all know that Australia is also deeply, has really brutal, you know, refugee policies. And my dad just said really casually, as we were, you know, watching television when I was home last, that the visa that we arrived on was the mixed, quote-unquote, mixed marriage visa. So it wasn't a visa that was available for specifically, you know, Bosnians fleeing. It was for the fact that you had to, and a lot of people kind of had to, you know, make up origins. So it was for a Bosnian and a Serbian or Croatian. And each of these little anecdotes, when you think about it, reveals a lot about, you know, how and why. It's like, you know, and Angela Merkel was able to kind of like appear as a very humane, you know, leader of Germany at the time, because she, and this is how it would often be described, let in, you know, all these Syrian migrants. Migrants are a necessary part. They're the cheap labor force of every country. And the same is, you know, over the last few months, one thing that I've been really thinking about is in myself and many of my friends who are here on the, you know, quote-unquote artist visa, the freelance visa, which has made our lives in Berlin possible. It is a far more accessible visa than exists in, you know, certainly anywhere in Europe, certainly than in America, certainly than in Australia. And then all of a sudden I thought, what a masterstroke that was of kind of statecraft, because we all, you know, contributed our taxes and you know, you don't really necessarily get very much in return. You pay healthcare, you pay so on, and then you know, you realize that there was this ability to control a narrative where Berlin suddenly appeared like the cultural city. There's some of the things that it's well known for, and all it took was the creation of this visa, which really, I mean, it's a couple thousand people. It really means very little, you know. And in the same way as, like, you know, my life, of course, has been defined by a series of movements, whether I've had choice in them or not. Although I think that the thing I always question is, even when you think you have choice, sometimes it is already kind of determined for you.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So speaking of that visa and the availability of it, we've kind of already touched on cheap rents and how the city is changing, the political situation is changing. Do you feel, the city has long been a space for creatives. It's been a space for people trying out new outlets, as you alluded to, Areez. Do you think that still exists? Is it still going to exist for a long time? Or is the city now changing because of these political, economic changes beyond still being that safe space for artists?
I feel like I've experienced it in the past 6 months as being something that has been strained. I mean, like the cultural sector having the budget cuts just recently. The institution that I'm with had 50% of its annual budget slashed. So yeah, there's strain in the air, and I'm not sure exactly what that portends. For the wider scheme of things, in terms of like programs like this as an international residency, it's really interesting because at the same time it requires a certain amount of sponsorship from sort of it, like on an international scale. We were kind of comparing it to the UN backstage. There's this like idea that bodies from various parts of the world congregate under one roof, and we should be, in an ideal world, forming solidarities. However, it kind of, when there's strain, you kind of end up working in these little vacuums, and so we have to remind ourselves that we need to connect and we need to check in with one another within this kind of format of artist residencies, especially, in a place like Berlin, which can get pretty aggressive at times, especially if you're new here.
And the both of you, do you think the city is still this romanticized safe space for artists, or is that changing?
I can speak, I don't live here, but I can speak from my experience living in Athens and meeting a lot of particularly Levantine and Arab artists who are kind of leaving the city because they're not feeling welcome, or in fact they're not welcome anymore, and coming to Athens to kind of find if there is another place that they can settle in, and finding that Athens doesn't have a freelancer visa unless you earn a ridiculous kind of wage, so it's not accessible. There are no there are no institutions to kind of like employ you part-time while you're making your work. There are no grants. Healthcare is very expensive. So it's not an ideal city for an artist who depends on local wages. Whereas here you can actually support yourself. There are some institutions, and it's a bind that people find themselves in, which is that it's a contradiction, and it's very unpleasant to kind of think about who's excluded from the body politic so that you can enjoy the privileges of an artistic community.
Yeah, I mean, I would only add that, definitely rent has obviously, as we all know, skyrocketed over the years. One thing that was remarkable about Berlin was the fact that, when you received a contract, if you were lucky enough to get one, it's a permanent contract. So you're not having to uproot yourself every 12 months. That's incredible. I forgot about this every time you go to, when I was in Australia recently, and, the what's left of the social housing is being torn down. People are displaced. It's really kind of like a constant stream. So the situation with rent has changed massively in terms of the livability of Berlin. I think that's also changed massively over the years. I think wages are in the arts extremely low. And while there are institutions, I don't know. I think that there is a really high degree of precarity in the arts. There's a lot of social liberalism, which is fantastic. There is, there are radical ways to live in the city. But that being said, there is not a ton of, it's also, I guess it's different depending on where you work, but the infrastructure can't support everyone. Certainly in the last 12 months, as art budgets have been slashed, as there's been an incredible rise in censorship, I think that a lot of the, safeguards have really fallen away. Mm-hmm. But of course, it is still, unfortunately, it is still much cheaper than other cities. So it is still, it is still more viable than the horrifically unviable, So that's the...
Is there anywhere else comparable that gets discussed within your circles as another place where living is viable, where, more voices can be heard? Or is this still, despite its flaws, is Berlin still the creme de la creme?
I mean, Athens was actually something that came to mind, but you kind of burst that bubble a little bit. Yeah. No, I lived in Athens for a while. I did an artist residency there in 2019. So I do know a little bit about but it was one of the shorter ones, so I didn't really get to engage with it as much. I was in that Exarchia bubble. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I can't think of anywhere else.
Mm. But I think there's also, it's like, I feel like it's sort of like gentrification has hit every city. There's a housing crisis everywhere.
Totally. Mm-hmm.
There's nowhere that, I wonder about like the forms of life that were possible for us. I feel like we're the same age roughly, probably about the same age. I feel like we're the last generation who get millennials.
Yeah.
That's why we're complaining so much.
Yeah.
But we're the last generation who got to have like cheap rents in kind of downtown areas in whatever city we lived in. Yeah. And then it kind of just stopped after there was that period just after the global financial crisis where not everything was gentrified. You could still get, salt chips, normal chips, and now they have to have like roast ham and champagne. I don't know. So I remember that experience of like paying 300 Australian dollars a month to live in a big share house with lots of interesting people, and that doesn't exist for young people now. And I wonder like what's going to be lost culturally, artistically, politically. Because you can't move to Berlin. You can't afford to live in Berlin anymore if you're that age and you want to kind of do something other than get a full-time, white-collar, professional job. Mm-hmm. I worry about it. Obviously, we all do.
Yeah. I guess, I think that's what I was alluding to, probably not very well, in terms of the accessibility of Berlin's visa has also meant, which is obviously an incredibly positive thing, that the ability to move here was not so wasn't so classed, and you will often find that the people who are able to move to London or to New York or so on and so forth, unless they're able to find some sort of, unless you're able to navigate some of the complex and opaque systems of this or that scholarship or something, it's pretty difficult. So that was one of the things that meant that Berlin had both a more international and just a generally a broader kind of quote unquote global community. I don't know what phrase we can use there, but it had a more, a less kind of stratified group of people living here.
So, and that's like kind of part of the charm as well, right? Like if you're interested in being a citizen of the world, you're interested in learning about new cultures and talking to new people and hopefully coming across, someone from somewhere with some background that you have never experienced before. For me, that was certainly part of the charm because I want to understand, the globe better. New Zealand is tiny. We are on the bottom of the world. Sure, we do have, of course, people from all over, but it's different. The experiences that people have had, the migration backgrounds, the reasons that people have come here are so different. Also because the exclusivity of New Zealand and the cost and also our visa system is not exactly welcoming. Is the international vibe of the city and the people in it also part of the reason you're here, and has that shaped your work?
I mean, I think that it isn't necessarily something of interest in a kind of it wasn't a choice, you know. Just to as the child of migrants who've Persian, born in India, grew up in Swana, and then migrated to New Zealand because in their late 40s, early 50s, my parents just wanted a place where there was a small community from our little Parsi ethno-minority, which there was in Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland, and we migrated there as children, and for them it was a mode of necessity, you know, to go there and to establish something that is that resembles home and community. And so unfortunately for me, I didn't find that as appealing being a teenager or a young adult, you know, like to be stuck in that little corner of the world, which, yes, we do have our charm. It does have its charms, but it doesn't necessarily offer what you just described. There's, I guess, always the search for people from the diaspora for that notion of, the plurality of home and what it represents. And I suppose Berlin has that in some sense, and I don't know. There are many places. It's not just Berlin that represents that for me, and that offers that to me. I also, in my late 20s, started living partly between Mumbai and I guess my home base, which would be Aotearoa, New Zealand, particularly because I wanted to think about a person from the diaspora returning to their birthplace, but not just returning as a act of extraction, but rather to do kind of what you mentioned earlier, Ellena. It was to contribute to the place and not just go there and experience it and then leave with its resources. So I'm trying to figure out what it means to do that in a place whenever I kind of move to a new place, and it takes more time. It can't just be done in a year or in a few months.
I'll come back to your answers on that one in a second, but I'm really curious because you are living between a lot of places at the moment, the artist residencies, it's very dependent on what becomes available. Does this sense of wanting to contribute to a place mean that you might be more likely to settle down somewhere because that feels like the right thing to do, to be a part of, even if it's your own, community of choice, that you are giving back?
Yeah, I think in my sense, and it's a particularly sort of beautiful thing that happened. My grandmother left a house behind that had been in our family for 4 generations, just an apartment in Mumbai, and it had been left to kind of abandonment, really. No one lived there from my family after she spent the remaining years of her life with my parents in Aotearoa. And so I took that as an opportunity to kind of think about this space as an archive, a living archive for our family's history, its migration history, but also its associations with what it meant to be Parsi in the context of India historically, but also contemporary India. And it sort of grew, and it's a constant learning curve for me to keep returning and to keep engaging with the community there, and I suppose recording stories and histories. My grandmother's neighbors, who basically raised my mom, a lot of them just had so many stories that I felt like were important for me to navigate and archive before. They're an aging population there, so it felt like a thing that someone needed to do at some point in order to preserve some of these stories before they get lost.
Yeah, and so that's then mixing your artistry and also your sense of self and that sense of giving back to the community.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, and Ellena and Sanja, we were just talking about the multicultural mix of Berlin and whether that was something that was attractive to you, whether you have tapped into that and how that has shaped your work. And I guess, Ellena, like you coming back as well, is that part of the reason why you keep coming back?
I think it might be. And I have this, like, I suffer from, like, Australian bumpkinism and parochialism, where I'm quite, obviously Australia is a nation of migrants, but there's such a kind of, like, state-level enforced assimilation project. I think it's the country where, like, families, like, children lose their parents' language in one generation, and everywhere else it's 2 generations. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's so deeply enforced to assimilate that when I'm in a city like Berlin and you hear many languages being spoken on the street, and that's the same in London and New York, it feels like that's a real city, and I feel excited by it and moved by it, and it's very romantic and very bumpkiny, but I do like it. Yeah, it's very attractive.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, certainly my, I guess my social milieu is made up of, people from all around the world. But as you were saying, I was, one of my favorite parts of New York is Jackson Heights, and the kind of like right-wing kind of line about Jackson Heights, which is extremely kind of like demonized, is that you don't hear English being spoken on the street. And I'm like, yeah, that's why it's so wonderful. It does actually feel like the most, has the most life of, I think all of New York. But yeah, certainly Berlin's diversity is crucial for any kind of, I don't know, but that is something that kind of, I guess we're coming close to a question of how is that policed, or what are the acceptable borders of that in Berlin as well. Yeah.
So how could we create, I mean, we're really putting the world to rights here now, but how can you create a sustainable city that has enough housing, where everyone is paying enough taxes to be able to still create this safe space and to have the public funding to be able to have artist residencies and to be giving grants out, when the city is this transit station? You've got people coming in and they're going out, and maybe they're paying taxes in another country, so they're not contributing to whether the rubbish is being picked up or whether the buses are turning up on time. Like, there is the sense, and I've certainly been thinking about it, like, what is it partially our responsibility that things are changing here because there are so many foreigners and people that wanted to live here? And how can we change that? What would being a responsible citizen look like? Not just here, everywhere, but specifically, in Berlin, if there's anything.
I'm drawing a blank here. I guess it's maybe in the sense where there's a responsibility to contribute, at least for me, in the sense where we need to learn the ways in which certain histories have been told, and perhaps suggest alternative methodologies with which we might be able to, I don't know, I guess storytelling is a contribution in itself, right? I think of it that way. But that's maybe like a very romantic response. I don't know.
Yeah, I got really into the practical there. I'm not sure.
You got into the practical, and I'm like, yeah.
I'm an artist.
Yeah. I think it's of value, and I think it should be valued, and I think it, like multiple perspectives being heard, contribute to a very generative atmosphere in a place.
Nice. What are you doing in Athens? That you were talking about trying to find that sense of community and contribute. Is there anything specifically that you're doing that makes you feel?
I mean, when we do kind of, I collaborate with Greek writers to make things happen, and instead of just doing expatty things, I try to, every time we're producing an event or making something happen culturally or artistically, it's not just for Anglophones. I'm making sure that it's multilingual. and that we're including visitors to the city, because they're also a part of the city, including locals, including people at different stages of their migration process, because that's what a city is. It is visitors and it's locals, it's taxpayers and blow-ins. And we should be able to kind of collaborate, live with each other, build something together and create hybrid cultures from our differences.
Yeah.
Nice.
The question is, how do we make a livable city? Is that the question?
Like,
I mean,
the
like,
responsibility.
I know it's way above my
I think
pay
like
grade.
Deutsche Wohnen had to expropriate those 300,000 houses or whatever it was, and then you have livable rent, and then everything changes. I mean, that's the first thing. Rent is the most important thing. People need stable, affordable places to live, which is what Berlin once had. And in terms of other things, I mean, I'm not sure, because I think that everyone, I mean, you know, in terms of your ability to be in Germany or Europe as a tourist, that is really, you know, it's 90 days every 180 days, I think. So everyone else is, you know, quote unquote paying taxes or contributing. But, you know, so I don't know. I think that the onus is on. It's less individualized for me. The onus is on, you know. So, you know, like the Berlin had 3 years ago. I keep harping on about the Deutsche Wohnen there was a referendum that passed remarkably. 61%, I think, someone can correct me, percent of people voted to expropriate 300,000 houses, I believe, and it was just lost it just died out. It just wasn't, and too many other things happened, but, you know, largely it was the fact that it got lost in and amongst, despite the incredible kind of like will and desire of the people, it got lost among the, you know, politically. So yeah, I think some of the answers aren't as complicated as they're made out to be. You know, there's higher wages, artist wages, so on and so forth, the conditions that people need. I mean, you know, there's a progressive candidate in New York running for mayor at the moment on the campaign of free buses, free childcare, and freeze the rent. You know, that it's three things that are very simple. And actually, remarkably, one of the core tenets is state-run grocery stores, which I don't think Americans will really ever go for. But, you know, like, these are the things that should be being dealt with, how to, you know, like, inflation, you know, so that food, you know, it's I don't think it's,
lives.
Yeah, I don't think it's really that complex either. I mean, yeah.
Can we turn that question back on you, Shannon?
I mean, you can. I guess this is like, I've been here for 4 months, right? So I am experiencing so many people's different perceptions of the city, like everything from like, why would you want to live there? Everyone has blue hair, to like, why are you even in Germany? Because there's a war going on. Everything's expensive. Everyone hates each other. And like, so, one of the panelists said earlier, like, people really look at, I think Australia, but like definitely New Zealand with rose-tinted glasses. And I think my response to people's stereotypes has been, honestly, we're going through pretty much all of the same issues as Germany is. Like, you're not actually that special. Like, we also have we have way more expensive rent than here. The groceries are as expensive, if not more. We also are dealing with a lot of cultural issues right now. And so I, now looking at this city, or this country, there are a lot of things that do work. I think that is, in my experience thus far, the healthcare is working. Of course, there's a shortage of nurses everywhere, but that is a relatively good system and it does protect most people. I think the public transport is quite good compared to New Zealand.
Yeah.
Like,
It's incomparable to...
and like, of course, the trains are late sometimes, but like, I can get everywhere I need.
Yeah.
And at every time of the day. And I came from somewhere where like, if I couldn't drive myself out of my driveway, I would have had to walk for over an hour to get to the next town.
And like one of the reasons I think I left is because I don't drive.
Yeah.
Well, this is a good
I
city
really
for you.
struggled. I really struggled in New Zealand.
Yeah, so then...
It's a forced migration.
Yeah, by necessity. Yeah.
So then looking at like how do you contribute, for me, it's kind of different. I think the language has really played into it for me because I do interact with people in their mother tongue, and that fortunately or unfortunately does really make a difference for people's experiences here. And I have had some really beautiful experiences with people. We live in Weissensee, which I would consider to be quite German and not very international. And like we had this one lovely old lady who was like just curious and looking at the building and came up to us with our dog and was just kind of asking where we were from. And at the end of the conversation, she was like, well, welcome to Germany. It's so great to be here. Like, congratulations. I wish you all the best.
Wow.
And like that was...
Wow.
Right? And like that is an experience that only I could have had as a person that could have visually passed as German and also is speaking German. And so that was like beautiful, but as you can tell, I'm still thinking about that conversation and what that means all these months later. And so for me, the contribution is kind of like I actually am trying to be a bit more German, I guess, like trying to figure out what that means to contribute to life, what a contribution looks like for them. I mean, like, we really like where we live, and the other day there was like a cleanup at the local pond to like try and get the rubbish out of it, and like my husband went along and like pulled out trolleys from the water. Like, that's a contribution. I think that's really nice. But in terms of like, yeah, making the city more livable, I don't know. I think I need to learn more. Like the politics side of things, I'm not very well read into yet in terms of like the specifics of it, but yeah, I guess I'm learning. Anyway, how have we got? 15 more minutes. Yeah, it's going fast. I wanted to talk a little bit about echo chambers, actually, because I find this city and your experience of it can be hugely determined by where you live and who the people are that are around you. So I'm curious which suburbs you lived in while you were here and how you think that kind of categorized your experience, particularly in like the east versus west side of things, I think is still very prominent.
Oh, yeah. Well, it wasn't my choice. I live in Friedrichshain.
But would you have chosen it?
No.
Okay.
My studio is in Katki in Kreuzberg, so I'd like to say I live there, but I don't. But I spent a lot more of my time there, I suppose, because I feel more at home, and there's this, frenetic plurality and diversity and an incredible access to, communities there that are non-white. That makes me feel a lot more comfortable in comparison to where I live, which is Friedrichshain. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you find Friedrichshain to not be a particularly diverse place? I
mean, not the part where I am. I mean, I'm kind of by Boxhagener Straße or Platz. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's definitely a sense of like historically, I believe there were a lot of left-leaning groups and these anarchist squats. And this kind of goes back into this history of the housing crisis and having been affected by a lot of like rent raises and I suppose evictions. I'm not really sure what the history of the place is, but from what I've sensed and from what I've been told by a few local friends who've been there for longer, the shape of Friedrichshain, or that particular part of Friedrichshain, has very much been affected by a high influx of gentrification and those particularly unsavory elements that kind of push away the locals. And, from what it sounds like, it was a vibrant part of Berlin perhaps 20 years ago, but it doesn't seem to have that energy anymore. Yeah.
Interesting. How about you, Ellena?
When I visit, I normally stay around Neukölln, Kreuzberg, where my friends live. But I think for me, the bubble is not so much geographic, although it definitely is. It's linguistic, and I think when I come here, it's actually a relief to be. Most of my friends are native English speakers here, and that's not true where I live. And so there are certain things, and even just Australians, I miss out on having kind of constant contact with Australians where I live. And I sometimes I hear Australian accents and I chase people and I just want to talk to them.
Wow, you really seek that out.
I used to hate it and I feel ashamed of my Australianness.
Come to Friedrichshain, there's a lot of
there are many Australians in Athens, and so I miss the being able to speak my slang, and so being here and being around Australians where there's just a kind of shorthand is really a kind of pleasant time for me, because I just get to be myself and I don't have to explain the references. It's nice. And it's also just this tiny little bubble of Australians. It's so parochial, but I think we like to be in our little native bubbles sometimes, especially when we've deliberately taken ourselves out of those bubbles.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Okay.
I live in Soldina Kiez, in Bedding. It's Osloer Straße, U-Bahn. I lived in Neukölln. As I like to call it, my teenager landlord kicked me out, so I moved to Soldina Kiez. I was just going to say, I don't know, the Friedrichshain was certainly there were a lot of fabled squats around there. That history is certainly long past.
Two have survived.
Two have survived, right? Yeah. But I mean, obviously this is a tale as old as time. But one of the more recent squat evictions is now, a very extractive art institution named Fotografska. Is that what it's called?
God.
So you can see those, and they've very intentionally kept some of the kind of graffiti on the wall as an aestheticized kind of claim on a history that has nothing to do with anything. But in any case, I think the rapid change is,
Isn't it true that they, I've never been there, but they charge you to go inside and view the space?
Yeah, I think
Which
it's
is
quite an expensive
insane
to
to capitalize on that history. It's wow.
So in your Keats, do you think you have a geographic bubble, or are you more like Ellena and you have a people bubble?
I think my move was certainly just a practical, I needed to find a place, and it was what was available. I love the neighborhood now. It is the only, there's kind of, it's a very working class neighborhood. It's not all quite gentrified, but there's a radio station called Kashmir Radio that people might be familiar, that's on the street. So when I see someone walking around looking lost and looking like they're wearing Balenciaga or something, I'm like, that way. But other than that, it's very much kind of a, I don't necessarily spend a lot of social time there, but it's very beloved, and it's, in as much as it's great to spend time in a new area, so
Has moving changed your perception or experience of the city?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I was there, I moved there right before COVID, during COVID actually, because I didn't even go see it. I did a viewing through my phone. And it is, as I said, a very working class neighborhood, and you could really see how neglected it was. And during COVID, when I think I had kind of like numerous neighbors suffer quite serious mental breakdowns, nervous breakdowns, which were, you wouldn't see as much, obviously, in a wealthier part of town, but, you really, being outside, some of the kind of, the way people in Berlin often refer to things is if you're outside the Ringbahn, being, you realize, I think it's, if you're a tourist in Berlin, it's certainly something that you wouldn't see as much. So yes, of course, there's, like anywhere, a lot more neglect and a lot more. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, no, that's interesting. We've not got that much longer, so I kind of want to look towards the future, and we did touch on this in terms of visas and finances and all that sort of thing. The one thing that's sort of been mentioned is freedom of expression and censorship. Sanja, you touched on it a wee bit. So I would love to hear more about how you feel that climate is changing, not just in Berlin. It is definitely happening globally. It's definitely happening in the US at the moment. And Areez, you mentioned that, and this is not exactly censorship, but you had noticed this kind of clipped way of talking here had kind of moved you away from wanting to explore certain topics in your work. And I don't know if that's the city, I don't know if that's the political climate, but I would be interested to hear more from you about that, and then from the two of you as well, just about whether the openness and freedom is changing and whether that might threaten the future creativity of the city.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that I've felt, I guess, like, compared to, we probably shouldn't be comparing, but like compared to the ways in which we're able to have corridor discourse back home in Aotearoa, we don't necessarily have the same kind of openness of spirit with which these topics can be broached without perhaps being put under a great deal of scrutiny, or at least fear of that scrutiny is something that I sort of have to navigate here in a way that I just haven't had to back home.
And is that scrutiny from your peers?
Institutions as well. Yeah. Yeah, there's like a sort of a stronger sense of rules, you know?
I think rules got mentioned already.
Yeah, and those rules cannot be broken.
Yeah, and that the rules are hindering your creativity?
I mean, in the sense where there are certain terms that we can't even use.
So that's like direct censorship.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which terms?
We don't want to get your residency taken away from you, but
I know, right?
Also.
I think you know which terms. You know which terms.
I don't. But if you really can't talk about it, then...
Yeah, no, I'm not going to.
Okay. Okay, that's really fascinating. Ellena, is there anything you have experienced here, whether that be, amongst peers or anyone has told you not to do anything?
I'm going to ask Sanja to...
Gets thrown. I think we discussed this briefly. Ellena and I know one another from years ago. But I mean, I guess this is a difficult question to answer in the few minutes that remain, because it is a long history. But I mean, I believe in 2019 it was that the what's popularly known as the BDS resolution was passed.
One of the terms.
Yes,
yeah.
Which didn't expressly, because it's a resolution, it didn't expressly make the BDS criminalized, but it, is sanctioned in other forms.
Can you just explain that abbreviation for...
BDS, the boycott, divest, and sanction.
Oh, I see.
And, in the last 18 months, we have witnessed things like saying there are, any number of phrases that were at various points explicitly illegal. For example, from the river to the sea was explicitly illegal at a certain point. I'm not sure what the status is right now. But certainly, the very active censorship against anything like a Palestine solidarity movement is something that is experienced daily, constantly in Berlin. And Berlin also has the largest Palestinian diaspora in Germany. So obviously that, and maybe there's something you'd
Has
like to add,
that, sorry, to interrupt briefly, has that impacted your work, or more so just how you feel about being able to live here and wanting to be supportive?
Gosh. I think that, there is a struggle against this form of censorship that is extremely important, and that, of course, I am invested in as a kind of like moral and political person. If that is an answer, I think that, yeah.
I was just going to say, I don't think they're mutually exclusive. Just to know that there is an environment of silencing and censorship instills within us who are creative people and live with these values and want to live by certain values, to just know that they're being curtailed.
Totally, that's exactly what I was getting at.
Impinges on the creative process, to live within those fearful peripheries.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. Ellena?
I think because I live elsewhere and my investments are elsewhere, I'm going to just pass on this question. I have a moral investment, but it doesn't affect me in my daily life here. So, yeah.
Is there anything that you have felt in the sense of censorship where you do live?
Look, there's a lot of state violence, but it's not to do with censorship per se,
Okay. So to wrap it up on maybe something that's not quite so dark, do you feel positive about the future of the city for creatives?
Me? I feel positive about the fact that we're here to at least those in my position, transiting through, are here to experience something, contribute to it, and then leave it as a letter in a suggestion box.
Nice.
And I don't know how else to frame it, or to use a metaphor to kind of think of one's brief period of time here, and what can be done to create great meaning out of it, because probably nothing. But the fact that, it was here and it will be archived as such, one hopes that it makes some kind of impact.
Beautiful.
I feel hopeful about events like this and the fact that they exist and they're happening in many languages in this city. I think that that's incredible and very inspiring. Thank you, Parataxe.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
I would say that, yes, I don't know that anybody really feels hopeful right now. Things are extremely bleak. But I was thinking of a quote by Darko Suvin where, he says something like, communism must be salvational or it is nothing. So, of course, if one believes in their cause and believes it to be righteous, then to a degree that is something like a hope in that. It is. Yeah. That's as much of an answer as I think I have.
Okay. Well, look, thank you all so much for joining us. We have a poet now, Sam. is coming to the stage. And he wanted to do his own introduction, so let's all welcome Sam.
I wanted someone to read my bio, but that's fine. Yeah, I'm just going to speak in English and read some poems. And I probably need to frame like myself and my poems a little bit, otherwise it will just be completely incomprehensible, because I'm a kind of I don't really do events. I'm a kind of an obscurity, and like not deliberately. So I just have to come at it running or whatever and improvise. And I feel kind of slightly überfordert by the situation, I guess. It's very kind of Alex and Martin to invite me, and I'm very happy to be part of this event and this conversation. Like so many things that people said resonated with me a lot, and I think that's maybe my problem, is that like everything resonates with me, and that's like I can't really end up saying anything, or I'm just kind of confused all the time. So without further ado, I will frame these poems, because I think if I don't frame them, they're just incomprehensible completely. These are mostly poems from some years ago now, and the first one is from a book that I wrote before and during COVID, it's like a, I don't know really how to explain it, but it includes like some foreign words, and it was kindly translated by a poet from where I live, like longer than I lived in Australia. Actually, like I lived in Neukölln for longer than I lived in Australia as a poet. Like I've been trying to be a poet for 20 years now, I realize, and it's like 13, 14 years like in Neukölln. So that's more than the half. I don't know. This poem kind of has a joke in it. It's like a private joke for a friend about the Belleville kind of scamp. I don't know if you guys know this. This is part of my like profound tourism. Like the arnaque du président is the scam by this guy Gilbert Chikli, who is the guy from Belleville who he pretended to be I think an Israeli political figure, and would phone up like politicians and get money from them basically. And he was eventually arrested, but there's a YouTube footage of him in I guess in jail. Kind of, he's about to get extradited back to France, and he says he does a kind of a l'chaim to the camera, you know. And I have a private joke with a friend from France, and that's why the word is in there. But I wrote this like 2019, I think, or 20. It's kind of like a vision of like tiny people, I guess. By l'chaim, hence cry the tiny punks on little ropes from the bowl's rim. They eat around the dish between the birds' songs. They eat airs between the small birds, the short songs of dusty stones, bed rubbish, planks withered, dragons' leaves from the thinking trees in the sky, driving above us between bags of filters, between white forks jogging on the grass of the less hard part not wearing out. And that's kindly translated into German by a poet called Elisabetta Kostadinowska. I have to admit, I forgot to send my translations to Martin. So I sent these yesterday. These are translations that Elisabetta made last year. this is a kind of like a false vision as well, I guess, a false, what's the word? Like Schluss, I guess. Like a syllogism, maybe. Like the only prospect from now on until next time, which they owed life, not its boxes. Though life, although it did not ask for, never asked for, nor took anything back, nor out on. Its generosity was, one couldn't even begin to say what it was or know what to do with it. Not to know, but not to know in the way that they know, to know something other than the things that had become so possible to only know. Life, it didn't seem like entropy farms or these random cages. When I picture you eating the industrial mayonnaise from a trap shaped like a 10-litre bucket in the corner under the window of the kitchen of the resonance, something kept calling us back. But it doesn't seem like history, does it? If the eye of the dog is the link between worlds, which does it come from? But the dog's eye, demon of links, won't say whence it comes. A false symmetry separates us. And the end of that poem is, it's just quotations, the last stanza. It's from favourite people of mine, I guess. Like, it's from a quotation from John Ashbery, I think, one of his longer poems. And then the thing about the dog is a lyric from a band called the Urs Graf Consort, and the song is called Sinotaph, which is like grave of a dog, I guess, in some sort of Greek. And a false symmetry separates us, I think, is a line from Sean Bonney. And this poem has no translation and no title. It's a little bit longer. I hope it makes some kind of sense. Sometimes when I'm not doing particularly well, I like to pretend I'm you. It makes me feel better in some way I don't know, which is probably something that I like too. My body might adopt some quality of yours so that my way of standing in that moment has something to do with your way, set as the angle at which I stand to that moment as we go through this world together, separate, and with which we in part collide as others and as ourselves. This poem is from 2019, by the way. Avoiding some accidents well in advance, yet seeking out others semi-deliberately, although still also with time to look away from the clash for as long as we don't yet know we caused the worst to come to pass by chance, and time afterwards, but still before the smash has come conclusively, to forget the misapprehensions colluding with institutions to mask where we do meet, and which thus coax us to pretend to resemble each other in feats of necessary effort that are wasted in the end because we really are together on a vast terrain of not being at all alike whatsoever. I mean, we aren't on that terrain, but across its surface, like error, across its surface, bumping into one another, and often with great pleasure. And if we fall into holes common on this surface, also shifting, so much the better. We seem to have gotten ourselves into something to crawl out of. I may be becoming too optimistic about a situation I could also live to forget, but it does appear that the crushing blow is withheld for some moments, kept off for sometimes is still, and at the same time the end with its final balance of effort versus evasion has so far not arrived yet. As in, it is all right that we continue to pretend to have something to do with each other in some ways that sometimes blur the terrain of our really becoming something else together, while also not needing each other because not actually each other in an absolute, that is, relative sense. It is all similar in the many, the magnification that is only everyone together's overt disguise, unjustified in encrypted patterns that seem a maze when they are not in our plans but full of innocence in all we do, that is to do with how we don't hand in our last devices before everything tips over and sinks in the impossibility of not doing so. We keep them for ourselves, which are the others too, so as to demur more than 2 by 2 for the sake of things in diminishing, but also yet to be discovered ways that still have to be that way sometimes, and we should know, because all of us know both ways and more as well. There is something so gentle about your inane and nearly idios cosmos self-regard that I notice expressed in myself becoming an errant animal just like you, who sometimes pretends not to notice how the mistake doesn't really matter if you continue to know to learn around it. You know how the holes are there, being the air our lungs have to become because of the nonsense avoidance of those plastic column minds, the mind grey of these avoidant times, beyond the point where everything already went wrong. And, under such conditions, not doing well and fleeing into the presence of a past that had to pass to ever be present, is basically forgivable as reaction to the things that are unavoidable, though forgiving isn't the issue, but still not something strategically commendable to do. And I'll read one more poem. It's called Version of Poem. I have a few of these, but it's like a poem I wrote a long time ago in Melbourne, and it was called Version, and I think it was called Poem or something, and then I write different versions of it occasionally. Version of Poem. Path we know what we are, something capable of something, in a labyrinth of availability, wakes you up. To be clear, to see the traces, the trails, the flying tracers. To be clear, you wake up and also wakes you up. Clothes, home, small construction, ever important under the helipad. Time to get changed, time to labour, the trees are still drunk, but not finally standing under the poison in the basket, so much house holding on life. Thank you for inviting me to read.
Thank you so much, Sam Langer, for sharing your poetry with us. This is fresh, recent poetry from Berlin. And this is why we are doing this. We noticed that here in this city, literature is written in many languages. For instance, in Berlin, Australian, like these poems. If you want to know more about the international literary scenes of Berlin, please switch to our internet magazine Stadtsprachen.de, where we have a lot of manuscripts in many, many languages, and where we also will publish some of the results of this day. Thank you very much for the panel. Sanja Grozdanić, Areez Katki, Ellena Savage, and also Shannon Redstall, our wonderful moderator.
Parataxe digital.